When I was around 13, I dated a girl whose house I visited often. She lived nearby, so it was easy for me to stop by frequently. Over time, I got to know her really well, and I spent so much time with her family that they treated me like one of their own. I even became familiar with small details about their home, like the constant aroma of fresh coffee and the way their dog eagerly greeted me at the door. But something about the house always felt slightly off. One day, my girlfriend told me the house was haunted. I didn't believe in ghosts, so I brushed it off and acted interested to keep the conversation flowing. However, after some time, I began noticing unsettling things around the house. At first, I dismissed them as normal, just creaking noises or the wind. Living in Florida, it seemed logical to attribute odd sounds to the weather. But then the scratching noises began. They came from her closet, and we assumed it was her cat, which often roamed her room and liked to hide in unusual places. Thinking the cat might have been locked inside, we opened the closet door, but there was nothing there. That alone was eerie, but we chalked it up to a mouse or a rat in the walls. However, we soon noticed scratch marks inside the closet. They were at the height of a small animal, but the cat wasn't even in the room. It left me uneasy, though I tried not to let it get to me. Over time, the scratching continued, and the closet's paint became visibly damaged. The cat also began acting strangely, and certain parts of the house, like the garage and master bedroom, had an undeniable sense of unease. Still, I insisted there had to be logical explanations. I didn't want to entertain the idea of anything supernatural. One day, something happened that shook me. My girlfriend invited me over, and when I arrived, there were no cars in the driveway. She let me in, and we hung out in her room, watching TV and chatting. After a while, we turned off the TV to talk, and out of nowhere, we heard her older sister yell her name from outside the door. Thinking her family had returned, we checked, but the house was empty. We called out to her sister but got no response. Deciding we must have imagined it, we went back to the room. Not long after, we heard her sister call her name again, but this time, the sound seemed to echo through the entire house. It was loud, clear, and eerily identical to the first call, like a recording playing on loop. Alarmed, we searched the house thoroughly but found no one. Feeling uneasy, we tried to convince ourselves it was nothing. About an hour later, her dad's truck pulled into the driveway, and we watched as her sister got out of the back seat. Confused, we asked her why she had been calling for my girlfriend earlier. Both her sister and dad looked puzzled. Her sister insisted she had been out shopping since early that morning. When we explained what had happened, her sister's face went pale. She pulled my girlfriend aside to talk privately, leaving me waiting in her room. When my girlfriend returned, she seemed shaken but tried to downplay it. She asked if we had entered her sister's room, and when I admitted we had, she became upset. She warned me that if we ever heard her sister's voice while she wasn't home, we should never enter her room. Then she told me something chilling. Above her sister's bed was an attic, and one night, her sister woke to find the attic door slightly open. Staring down at her from the darkness was her own face. Years later, her family moved out of that house, but I've always wondered what we experienced. I've thought about visiting the house, but I don't want to be the person who shows up asking strangers about ghosts. Still, that experience left me questioning everything, about life, the afterlife, and whether monsters or demons might actually exist. When I was 15, my family relocated to a new state and moved into a different house. I got the biggest of the 3 upstairs bedrooms, which felt like a special privilege. It even had its own bathroom, but there was something strange about it, a small door tucked away inside the closet. The door was about 2 feet wide and 3 feet tall, positioned at the very back of the closet. It immediately gave me an uneasy feeling. Being a fan of paranormal stories, I couldn't help but think of the small door in the movie Coraline. When I opened it, I saw insulation partially blocking the entrance, though it seemed to have been disturbed, as if someone had moved or pushed it aside. Beyond the insulation was a tiny, unfinished attic-like space with bare wooden walls. The room felt noticeably warmer than the rest of the house. After a quick look around, I didn't find anything out of the ordinary, so I closed the door and didn't think much about it, at least for a few weeks. That changed when, one morning, I woke up to find the little door open. At first, I thought I must have left it that way by mistake. I got up, closed it tightly, and didn't dwell on it. But the next morning, the door was open again. This time, I was sure I had shut it before bed. I began wondering if one of my siblings was playing a prank, even though it didn't seem like their kind of humor. I asked them repeatedly, but they denied any involvement and acted like they didn't care. My little sister even seemed scared when I brought it up. Determined to stop it from opening, I decided to lock the door that night. That's when I noticed something unsettling. The lock wasn't on the outside of the closet, where you'd expect it for a storage space, it was on the inside of the small attic-like room. This struck me as strange. Why would the lock be set up to trap someone inside? The thought gave me an uneasy feeling, but I pushed it aside. I locked the door from the inside, closed it firmly, and wiggled the handle to make sure it was secure before going to bed. The next morning, however, the door was open again. At that point, I told my parents about what had been happening. They just laughed it off, joking about ghosts, and didn't take me seriously. I felt completely alone in dealing with whatever was happening. But what happened next left me shaken for good. One afternoon, I went to my room to take a nap. The house was quiet, and sunlight poured through the blinds, making it feel safe and peaceful. I don't remember falling asleep, but I clearly remember opening my eyes and noticing the room was unusually dark. Lying on my side, I turned my head and saw a dark humanoid figure sitting beside me on the bed. Its entire body was pitch black, like a living shadow in 3 dimensions. I was frozen, unable to move or speak. It felt like hours passed, though it was likely only a few seconds. Suddenly, the room brightened again with sunlight, and the figure was gone. I stayed perfectly still, terrified and trying to process what I had just experienced. My heart raced as I replayed the scene in my mind, unsure if it had been real. It felt far too vivid to dismiss as a dream. That experience was the last straw. I was no longer just scared of the door, I was terrified of whatever was connected to it. I grabbed a scarf and tied it tightly around the door's handle, securing it to a shelf in my closet. Thankfully, that worked. The door stayed shut after that. 3 years later, I moved out of that house, and about a month ago, my parents and sister also left. Until the day they moved, the scarf remained tied around the door. I've never had sleep paralysis before or since that incident, and I'm not even sure if that's what I experienced. But one thing I do know, it never happened again as long as the door stayed closed. I live in a condo with my wife and child. Our master bedroom has a walk-in closet, and inside it, there's a small door that leads to the attic. I don't think the attic connects to any other condo, though we do share walls with neighbors on both sides. One evening, while I was folding laundry and putting it away, my wife came out of the bathroom. The bathroom is directly across from the walk-in closet, so their doors face each other. She was about to ask me something when she suddenly gasped and told me to look up. A chill ran through me as I followed her gaze to the attic access. The small door was slightly ajar, its cover visibly out of place. My wife explained that she had noticed it while giving our child a bath nearby. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen and unsure of what to do. Then I shook off the shock, grabbed my phone, and called 911. My wife quickly took our child downstairs to get them both ready to leave, while I stayed upstairs, keeping an eye on the attic door. The police arrived after what felt like an eternity and checked the attic thoroughly. They didn't find anything, no signs of forced entry or tampering, just the attic cover moved and left open. Now I'm sitting here alone, questioning whether we overreacted or if something more sinister had happened. The part that really unsettles me is not knowing how or why the door had moved. Neither my wife nor I had touched it, and there's no way our child could have reached it. What's more, there were no signs of disturbed fiberglass insulation or anything that suggested someone had been crawling around in the attic or the closet below. I'm seriously considering installing a lock or making the attic cover more secure, but I'm not particularly handy and have no idea how to go about it. It's unnerving not knowing if someone, or something, was responsible for what we saw. When I was about 8 years old, my family moved into a new house. It wasn't brand new, but it wasn't very old either, probably built sometime in the 1960s. It had its share of history, and for the first time, I had my very own room. I felt grown up and excited about having my own space. Even as a kid, I was always sensitive to things most people didn't notice. I could sense when someone or something was nearby, even if no one else seemed to feel it. This feeling wasn't limited to daytime. At night, when everything was quiet, I could sense it even more clearly. At first, it didn't seem bad, so I tried to ignore it. There were 3 areas of the house I didn't like spending time in: the basement, the bathroom, and the attic. The basement always felt icy cold, and I often heard strange sounds coming from there. If I had friends over, I could manage being down there, but when I was alone, I couldn't stand it for more than a few minutes. It always felt like someone was watching me. The bathroom had an enormous cabinet, so big you could probably fit 2 adults inside. It was unsettling, though I never understood why. I'd catch myself staring at it for no reason, feeling a deep sense of unease every time. The attic, however, was the worst. I never opened its door and kept it shut as much as possible. There was something about it that gave me the strong impression that whatever was up there didn't want anyone near it. One night, around 2:45 a.m., I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep. The house was completely silent when I suddenly heard footsteps in the hallway outside my room. They weren't loud, just soft, deliberate steps, like someone walking slowly. At first, I thought it was one of my brothers coming home late, but as I listened closer, I realized the sound didn't match anyone I knew. The footsteps didn't stop outside my door as usual. Instead, they kept going, slow and steady. My bedroom door was open, so I peeked out into the hallway to see who it was. I stared for what felt like an eternity, but no one passed by. Fear started to creep in, but I stayed still, hoping it would just go away. As my eyes adjusted to the dark, I thought I saw a faint, human-like figure standing in the corner of my room. I told myself it had to be a trick of the light and tried to roll over to go back to sleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. At 8 years old, I thought it might be the boogeyman. Terrified, I bolted out of bed and ran toward my mom's room. Her room was only 2 doors down, but the hallway felt impossibly long and pitch black at night. To leave my room, I had to squeeze past a slanted section of wall. As I slid along the wall, I suddenly felt 2 hands pressed down firmly on my shoulders. It was as if someone, or something, was holding me in place. I couldn't move, frozen in fear. Then, just as suddenly as it happened, the pressure released, and I was able to run again. I sprinted to my mom's room and jumped into her bed, too scared to explain what had just happened. That entire night, I heard the sound of footsteps pacing up and down the hallway, but I refused to look through the doorway. I didn't sleep that night, or the rest of that week. Every night, I stayed awake, too scared to even close my eyes. The next morning, I walked into the hallway and, for some reason, glanced up. The attic door was wide open. My stomach dropped, and a wave of dread washed over me. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been in the attic the night before had made its way into my room. Even now, at 22 years old, I can still remember that night vividly. I'm grateful I got out of bed when I did because I don't want to imagine what might have happened if I hadn't.